where it includes the exciting phrase of shifting conceptual paradigms. I'm sure that's what brought you here at 4 o'clock. What we have here is a panel of 3 folks who are going to shift your paradigm, hopefully, in a painless fashion. At the far left, starting with the first team representative, I guess, from the Property Fellowship is Joe Groban. And then, well, I won't make our cameraman swing all the way over, so I'll go in a line. Deb Cohen is to Joe's right. Deb is a member of the Business Organizations Fellowship team, which is officially ending this month and wrapping up the materials. And then on my right is Ron Eads, who is part of the Torts Fellowship team, which ended January of 2002. So we have 3 different representatives from each team, 1 from each team, 3 different teams. And I'm hoping that they can explain to you some of the thought process that they engaged in when authoring lessons. So I will turn it over to the panel. Thank you.
I know that Deb has given several presentations on sort of how you use CALI Author, and we're not going to do that, and she's really the one to talk to if that's what you're interested in. What we're doing instead, and it's the way I sort of came up with this title for this PowerPoint presentation, from teaching to authoring and back to teaching, is sort of the philosophy behind it, of what you try to do. And basically what you're trying to do with CALI Author, we think, is you take those things that worked in the classroom, all those great hypotheticals you came up with, those series of Socratic questions that you know work, and you turn them into a CALI lessonette. And then you can take that CALI lessonette and put it back into the classroom and teach with it. And of course, if it's one of the CALI lessons, then all of us get to use it also. So that's really what we're talking about today. And one little tip I wanted to give you, I know some of you have never used CALI Author, and so you've got a little bit of that fright of actually trying it. The only way to do it is just to do it. It's not that hard to use. You just have to bring it up on the computer and do it. I'm a firm believer in that. And so to warn you, as of 2 weeks ago, I had never used PowerPoint. So the reason I'm using PowerPoint today is to learn how to use it. I took a little class on it about 2 weeks ago, and I prepared this. So if it fails completely, it's not my fault. There's another person from the University of Louisville here by the name of Jim Becker. He taught me how to use it. So if it fails completely, it's his fault. But if it works, give him credit if you see him. So that's what we're trying to do today. Generally, we're going to talk about 2 things. Creating the lessonette, and that's what CALI calls them now. Each individual lesson they call a lessonette. And then we're going to talk about using the lessonette. And we've really broken that down into 2 things. We're going to talk about creating the lessonette. We're going to kind of go through these ideas that you pick a topic, you outline it, and I'll explain what I mean by think linearly and think globally. Picture, sound, graphic, using the works of others. But we'll also talk about using the lessonette, how you can get it to your students. So with that introduction, we're going to think first about how you create the lessonette. And the first thing you have to do, of course, you have to pick a topic. You have to think about what you're going to write about. And we're all going to start kind of jumping in here and talking as we go through this. But you'll notice that the way I kind of start off is the lesson ought to be about 45 minutes. I think that's what the current thinking is. And you kind of get your topic down to about 45 minutes, whatever you think it is. Think of the most important things that are within that topic. And then you have to think about, before you even start writing, what are you trying to do with that topic? And I think that's one of the hard things, and we were talking about that at lunch. Somebody want to add? I mean, my little comment is it a first experience lesson or is it a review session? And I thought that was...
I think one of the most difficult things that we have to do in any authoring process is to decide what we want the outcome to be. And in teaching, the outcome is pretty much what dictates what we do. And if we want it to be a first-time experience, certainly we would treat it differently from what it would be if it were simply to be an end-of-the-semester review. I like my lessonettes from a teaching model standpoint. I designed mine particularly to produce what I hope is a baseline of knowledge and information and skills before they come into a particular class on the topic. And I had aimed for it to be, each one to be even less than 45 minutes, and my students tell me they come out to about an hour each, so I've done a really good job on that. But that seems to be more indicative of what the student wants to do with a lessonette. Often the ones who've taken more time were the ones who stopped took notes, thought about it, worked through it a little bit, and then went into the question and answer process. So when you pick your topic, one of the things you might want to do is also consider how narrowly you want to draft each subcomponent in that topic, because the subcomponents themselves can be lessonettes, so that you can build on those, and as you string your lessonettes together, then you have an overall lesson that is completed for them.
I agree with the last comment in that you have to try and keep it manageable, and you can't get everything into one lesson. And you'll be tempted, oh, it's great to go there, and then sometimes you just have to decide not to. One of the tools we've been using in trying to judge how long our lessons are, because personally I can't judge the length of my lessons. It doesn't take me very long to go through it. I know the answers. I know the wrong answers. So we've taken to having students try them out and tell them how long it takes. With respect to how we use a lesson, when we were all talking about this, it got me thinking a lot, because I am in the DISCOURAGE Fellowship, which is an upper class course as opposed to usually a first year, and it's more of a statutory course for most of us as opposed to a common law course. And so I think that we, in our fellowship, we're using our lessonettes a little bit differently. Some of our lessonettes are intended to be either the review or the initial teaching, but some of our lessonettes are also designed to be an opportunity to make a student go through some statutes very, very carefully, line by line or section by section, and really learn to interpret and read the statutes. And yet others of our lessons are for the areas which I like to say, I tell them they need to know, like all about shareholder meetings or shareholder voting, but I never quite cover in class. These are the kinds of lessons where I'm sending them out to do the lesson so that they do have that background, and when the issue comes up in a class, it's like, oh, okay, yes, I know what that is.
Yeah, I think for me, the good example, and we mentioned this at lunch, in the torts group, I wrote a lessonette on what does reasonable person of ordinary prudence under similar circumstances mean. Well, you know, everybody covers that in torts. That's a concept that's going to be covered. So the lessonette is written on the expectation that will be read by the students, it will be covered in class, and so the lessonette provides a little more information, more detail, a way to think about it. However, if I were going to write a lessonette on one of the business torts, I would have to realize that a torts professor that has a class that's only 4 hours long probably won't cover the business torts. So that professor might say, go do the CALI lessons, and so it's a first experience. So you have to think about what the lesson is going to be. Once you've thought about what your lesson is, we were sort of laughing at lunch. I may be a little over obsessive compulsive. I outline everything. I start with an outline. What's it going to cover? I know the topic. What do I want to cover within it? Now, you'll notice that I mentioned on there that once you've used CALI Author a little while, you can actually do this in CALI Author. I'm starting to get to the point that I do the whole lesson from beginning to end in CALI Author. I outline it using the CALI Author, and then I add things to it. But I do work from an outline. Even CALI Author, you can move things around. I do like outlining. It allows you to make sure you've got everything there and you don't leave things out. Now, we even talked about that at lunch. One part of this is do whatever makes you comfortable, because some of you do it differently.
Yeah, each one of us is different, as each of you would be. And one of the things we were finding at lunch is how differently we were doing the same thing within these lessonettes. But the nice part about CALI Author is you can do it that way. Whatever is your style, it fits perfectly. It allows you to do so many things. Ron had mentioned earlier that he had never used PowerPoint before coming into this. And I'm on the panel because I'm really the technological dummy when it comes to using these things. Not only did I not do PowerPoint, I thought Word was either a nickname for Word Perfect or something I said to my mother. These things were relatively simple to work with once you got into the system of CALI Author, and you learn how to move things around. And sooner or later, you will have to do an outline, whether it's a formal outline or an informal outline, because we do that anyway to teach our classes. There are those of us who are not as linear, but still we want to have some sense, some organization, so that we know when we get to the end where we really want to be. And likewise, our lessonettes have to be that way. Well, in CALI Author, you can do that. You can set up your little outline. You can do it as an initial table of contents. You can do it in a variety of ways, and then move it around, see where it fits best for the end product that you would like to have.
Again, I think that the process of actually writing the lessons and working on the ideas comes with how you think and how you do things. Some of you, Ron was saying this, he can do the scholarship at 20 minutes a day. I can't. I need to have 2 days where I can immerse myself, and that's what I did. I took about a week of Christmas break, and I sat down and I wrote 3 lessons because I had the time to sort of really get it. And I don't necessarily, I know my topic and I know which issues I think I want to cover, and then I usually come up with my hypo. And I work from my hypos usually because I like to have my hook and my theme to sort of try and make it interesting and try and keep the student interested, because I think, as we'll get to later, in the generation of students we're dealing with, it's really important to try and keep them engaged with whatever hooks and ties we can do that with. So I don't think linear, I don't outline it in a traditional sense. I have sort of an idea in my head what I want to do, and then I come up with my hypo and I start writing and I start doing questions off there, and then I have to go back and revise it. It's probably not the most efficient way, but it's what works for me.
Yeah, and one of the beauties of CALI that I think makes it work very well for teaching is that you can do a lot of things with it. You've got the questions, but the students who select the wrong answer can then go to further discussion, sort of remedial questions, although we don't like to call them that. We don't like to say, you missed that question, now I'm going to take you to some remedial questions. But you can take them into some questions that are helping questions, some things that direct their thought. Well, I think that works very well for the lessons. It's a little hard to work it. It's hard to put it together that way. So what this next slide was designed to do is to give you some ideas of how to do that. And what I found easy for me to do is once I started doing the lessonette, once I had my main topic, I would take the little topics in it and begin working there. And it might be a sort of a subtopic, and I would need 2 to 4 questions for the subtopic. Well, I would think very linear for that. What's the first question? What's the second question? What's the third question? So that it was basically, if you got all the right answers, you go from 1, 2 to 3. And I would make sure I had those questions just like I wanted them. One thing that we all discussed at lunch that was good is finding the wrong answers is actually the hard part. If you're using multiple choice or true false or that sort of thing, coming up with a reasonable wrong answer is the hard part. Something that looks about right but not so hard or so close that it doesn't make sense, or something that's so bizarre is obvious. But what we've all discovered is we can use those wrong answers we've heard from other students, in class. So what's the most common wrong answer you hear when you ask a question? That's a good wrong answer to use. So for me, kind of the first building block is to get those little steps. And I think, let me give you the next step, and then we'll talk about it. Once I've got those 2 to 4 questions within a subheading, then I think, okay, where were those wrong answers that I commonly get? And that's where I start branching off. And CALI allows you to do that. And that's where you can start adding the detail, the things where the student didn't quite get the point right, so they picked the wrong answer. You can explain why it's wrong, take them to other questions, a lot of different forms of questions. That allows them to start filling in all that detail. One of the things that I think is sort of fun about CALI, students probably get more out of it when they get the wrong answer, because there's a lot more information that they can gain. But the hard part, of course, for me, one who thinks in a very linear fashion, is being able to add those side points. I don't see it all at once, so I work the 2 to 4 questions in a very direct way, and then I go back and fill in all the detail. Now, since you're not as linear as I am.
Well, one of the things that I really like about what CALI allows me to do is it allows me to do some of what I do in the classroom, which is a Socratic type of dialogue, only it's an individual. If you got an answer, I don't normally just branch when they get the wrong answer. I sometimes branch them either way, and I say, you said this, are you sure? Why? And I make them go through a series of questions to see if they can justify their answer or if I can make them change their mind, before I've ever told them whether they're right or wrong. And I think that is something we do in the classroom, but in the classroom we can do it with 1 or 2 students a day. And here we can do it with each and every one. And so I think that's a real benefit. And the other thing I like to keep in mind is that, especially after hearing everything going on at this conference yesterday about people with different learning styles, it sort of gave words to me to the things I've often thought about, which is the people who I guess are the tactile learners, who having their hands on the keyboard and doing cements it, and the people who are visual learners and actually reading it. And we can put in sound clips, and you can actually read or have vocal comments in there, so that if you want to appeal to the auditory too, fine. So those are the kinds of things I think are great when you're thinking globally and trying to figure out how you're going to use it. Branching for the wrong thing, branching to make them learn to stick to their guns and learn to articulate a reason, all these different ways of really using CALI to sort of further what you would do in the classroom.
There's one thing you have to be worried about when it comes to all this, though, is you're dealing with a faceless student. It's kind of interesting when I started to do the branching questions, because I thought that this was a great model or a method of doing some of the Socratic approach that you don't always get the opportunity to do in the classroom setting. This gives you a chance to spend a little more time with them, and like Deb, I like to do it even with the ones who got the correct answer. I think CALI calls it the stick to your guns question or something like that. And particularly on those, one of the options I like to give is the one where they say, I quit, I give up, I want to change my mind. And then you ask them another question, well, why would you want to change your mind? Never mind. It's just fun to torture minds. But aside from that factor, what it does is it gives them the opportunity to think. And as Deb pointed out, the machine can do this thousands of times and never get tired. And the tone of voice isn't there where it's 4:30 in the afternoon and you've already gone over the same question with 5 other people who have come in individually rather than in a group. And you're going, do you really want to ask this question? No, now you have the opportunity for the machine to ask, is this the answer you really wanted? Why? And what you can do then with this faceless student is deal with it somewhat neutrally, and they don't feel as if they're being put upon. The downside to doing that, though, that we have to watch out for in putting these together, is that we want it to have some personality. And so sometimes you really have to spice up the responses just a little bit. Now, the word dummy has been taken out of most of the lessonettes right now. But the idea simply is to try to engage them as if they were speaking with another person, just as if you were having that dialogue with them, and allow them to have some kind of a personal comment from you without our having page that they were showing us yesterday for the library web pages that were coming up. But this will at least make it more engaging for the students, I think, and I get more favorable feedback from the students on those types of lessonettes.
Yeah, and I think just to follow up for the next one of the things that we want to mention, if you're not real familiar with CALI, there are a lot of lesson types. It's not just the traditional 4 distractor multiple choice. There are a lot of lesson types. Everything from you can drag little boxes around to you can have a picture and make them click on different parts of the picture. You can have little pop-ups so that if they select something, they can get a little additional information. You can even have essay questions. You ask the question and then you provide a sample answer. So there's a lot of different lesson types. And part of the reason I kind of want to highlight that is one thing I think all of us kind of have agreed on, you've got to create an interesting lesson. I think if you've just got a whole series of those 4 distractor multiple choice questions, you're going to bore yourself to tears writing it. You're also going to lose the student. As she mentioned, people really learn one of 3 different ways, and there's a mix of that. They learn visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically. I am convinced, and I don't have the research to back this up, and I don't have any way to follow this, but Carl Sagan wrote a book that talked about that our olfactory nerves, the sense of smell was our oldest one. I think if we could ever figure out a way to teach with odor, because it's a much more basic primal concept. That's not in CALI yet, but I think that's the goal. But you can do sights, sounds, and then the touching on the keyboard to get all of their senses involved. And one of the points that you've got to keep in mind, we are talking about the MTV, Sesame Street computer game generation. These are people that are used to a lot of noise, sights, sounds, rapid-paced things happening. One of the things that CALI does is it begins to play into that kind of mentality. Some of us might like to talk about how we used to have to carry our books and walk 10 miles in the snow to school and to go borrow a book and then sit by candlelight at night and read it. Well, our students today aren't used to that. They want it fast-paced. And so you can put pictures and sound. You'll notice that I even put some pictures and graphics in my in my PowerPoint, which, and I did that partially, you have to be careful when you're writing it. All of these things will help provide interest points, will help explain your lesson. You don't want to have so much it detracts from it. So without writing it on the official or formal review sheet, you might let me know if I have too many graphics in my PowerPoint. I'm not really certain. I did have the words moving with sounds and stuff, but Deb told me to take that out. That was too much. But on that
In the critique, that does smell. We're missing the odor part of it. Not have to be a naysayer about this, but I do have to raise the point that not everything lends itself to graphics. One of the more difficult parts about the authoring process is to decide, when does a graphic really work? Sometimes I've looked at some of the graphics that have been put in a whole variety of materials outside of CALI Author, and I sometimes get the impression that sometimes they're there just because we're in a graphic generation and the images are there just to have the images part. And we all agreed when we were speaking before that really the idea is to have the graphics saying some kind of a message, to deliver the material or deliver the information in a way that's a little bit different from the straight line text. And I think that's important to recognize that this particular generation is not necessarily so text-oriented as many of us are. And that means then that we have to differentiate between what would we like to be seeing in the lessonette versus what they need in the lessonette. And that's where our focus really has to be in putting that lessonette together. What best delivers the message, and keeping in mind also that different people learn differently. Maybe in the same lessonette, you might have the text, and then the bullets, and then the graphics to go along with it, because you might hit 1/3 on one, 1/3 on another, and 1/3 on the last one. You've gotten the point across finally to most of them by doing it that way.
I'll go to follow up with 2 points. One is the hook. Graphics can be a good way. As I said, I usually work off my hypo, and I'll give one example. Everyone groans, but I did a shareholder inspection right lesson, and for it I used Pandora, the shareholder who wants to inspect the records of Box Incorporated. So we have a few throughout graphics of Pandora opening the box. And what I found is that that's the analogy I always used in class, and I found that they remember it. It's the kind of one that sticks with them, and if you have a little picture graphic there, it really cements it for those who are visual. The other thing that I really started doing much more of is the charts, the flow charts, anything that I could give them in some way to sort of box it, group it. Not everything is geared towards that, but those things that are, I really try to give them some kind of visual as well as a verbal picture next to it, because there are those who read the words and get it, and there are those who see that picture, that graph, and it's like, oh, okay. So I really try to do that. I've started using some color. You have to be a little bit careful with color, because not all machines see exactly the same color, and I've been warned that some people are colorblind, and therefore they don't see all the colors as I see them. But I had one lesson where I put all of the things related to one thing in one color, and all of the things related to another thing in another color, just in the graphics. And it became sort of a flow, and someone reviewed the lesson and said in the last one, wait a minute, why'd you switch your colors? It was so, okay, I wrote it, and it became a sort of a way for them to sort of group. And it was really very visually helpful to the people who are visual.
Yeah, and I think it does. I mean, I don't know how much you use the blackboard. It's something I have always done since I've taught, and I have found that sometimes even the silly little drawing that didn't mean much, but somehow or another tied in, hooked into the concept. I found students able to remember the little silly drawing and then remember the concept, and I think it's helpful. And then, of course, the graphics, I think, really become important if you have the complex case where a line diagram or a flow chart or something, so they can keep the facts straight.
And don't be scared about it. If you have problems doing your graphics, the people at CALI are wonderful about helping you get them done.
And at the same time, they have some clip art that you can use. Or if you can do any kind of drawing yourself, Paint is a very easy program to use if you can do any kind of drawing. One of the other things that Deborah mentioned that I began to think about using sound and some things like that, which is available. You can add sound to CALI, and I got reminded, of course, a couple of things. Don't forget, not all computers have sound available, and there are law students who are hearing impaired. So, you start running into the problem if you have a lot of sound in a lessonette. You may be in a situation where you may have a hearing impaired student somewhere out in the country who is using CALI because it's a very good resource that they don't need to hear. And then suddenly you've got a lessonette that's got a lot of sound features, and so that there are limitations on that you have to be careful with. One thing I think that is interesting about it is that if you want to get started, you kind of like CALI, or you've read some CALI lessons and you don't want to quite use them because you think there's a question in there you don't quite like, you can change them. You can take a CALI lesson and fix it like you want. Maybe you want to drop a question, or you want to change a hypothetical. You want to add a question. That's the point I was trying to make with this. I've talked to some faculty members who say, well, I'd like to use CALI, and I found this one great lesson, but boy, there's this question in it that I think is just wrong. Well, take it out. Let your students use it. So you're not bound by creating the whole lesson yourself. You can actually use what's out there and make little changes, little additions, or little deletions. I don't know if either of you have done that yet.
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the nice parts about doing that is if you find a lessonette that, let's say, starts at a higher level than the one where you'd like to start with your class, then you can start building in some of the more preliminary questions and have them leading up to this type of a lesson, or type of a question. And what you're able to do then is take this modified lessonette that you've done and put it to your webpage and let the students come in and work off of your webpage with this. And that way you've got control over what they're coming into, presuming they do it. I apologize. But they come in then with this baseline of information and this level of achievement you hope that they have at that stage, and you can test it early in your classroom setting by asking some of the questions that are coming out of that to make sure that they're exactly where you want them to be. Now you have that opportunity to spend the bulk of your lesson at the level where you would like the class to be.
Yeah, and so I think that's a feature. Well, assuming now...
About changing lessons, do we have to email them to get the password for that, or is it
Yes.
Yes.
one of the button? Okay.
Yes.
And a secret handshake too, but those are...
I'm a modest fee.
Oh, we already quoted the fee earlier.
That was to get your email address. No, you can contact Deb for that. Well, once you have written your own lessonettes or changed a few, or you just want to start off by using some that you know are out there. My first idea was the only thing you do is just jump right in. Let the students know they're out there. They are out there, of course, basically in two different ways. They are on the web, and as CALI schools, your students have access to that. Or they are available on CD, and that's a very inexpensive format. I know at the University of Louisville, we buy them up and hand them out to entering students. The price is very inexpensive. So they are available in both those formats, so you can mention them in your syllabus, almost anything. One of the things I did mention that both Westlaw and Lexis have those online syllabus services now, and a lot of law schools have their own Blackboard. And in fact, after we kind of run through this general discussion, Joe is going to bring up his website and his syllabus to show you how he has linked in some CALI lessons. So there's a multitude of ways of making them available. Joe, as you said, after this you're going to...
It has worked so nicely. I'll show it to you just for demonstration purposes after we're finished with the PowerPoint presentation, but it has worked so nicely. The students, this is the first year that I've had the opportunity to use it, what I did is I took all the CALI lessonettes and cited them on my syllabus at the topic point where it would apply. And that was part of their required reading. I'm not one of the more manipulative people. This is the lawyer in me. But that was part of their assigned reading for the class. And they were to go in and work the CALI lessonettes in addition to doing their cases, and they were to do the lessonettes before doing their cases. And the way I structured it is all they have to do then is double-click on the little blue link that's there on the syllabus, and it takes them right into the CALI lessonette. And I got interestingly favorable reviews back. I expected a lot of complaints coming from the students about more reading, more work, more this, more that. More often than not, the comment was, I understood the cases better. And that fits in with pretty much what we know about educational psychology. It goes without question today that especially in complicated material, everybody, but especially students, will read more effectively if they have some familiarity with the topic before they get into the difficult reading. And so what I was doing then is I was using the lessonettes to build that familiarity for them and move them over to material that would normally be difficult and then let them read the cases, and they were having significantly less difficulty. And I don't know whether it was the particular group that I had this year or whatever it was, but their lines of questions, the way that they responded to my questions, seemed to be so much more where I would like the class to be, as opposed to, okay, now this is a property class. But no, they were jumping right into some of the meat of the questions that we needed to cover. And I felt that really had to be with the fact, because of the fact that they were getting this information early on and they understood and analyzed the cases better.
One of the things I think is really important is no matter how many lessons we write, unless we get the students using them, they don't really do much good. Though, to be fair, I have found that looking at other people's lessons has been very helpful to me. It's given me a different perspective on some subject matter, something I've taught a dozen times, and I've read someone else's lesson and suddenly I said, haven't thought about doing it that way. And so it's given me some wonderful ideas for teaching as well as just for my students. Two things, one of which is let them know they're out there. The earlier the better. If first-year students know they're out there, they're likely to go and try them. If they don't find out till upper level, they're less likely. If one section in the school is using these lessons, the students in the other section start using them because they want to know what the other class is getting that they're not. And so that's a really important thing because some will really benefit from it, some won't. They won't learn as well that way. That's the luck of the draw, that's the luck of the way it is. That's the same with the way we teach in the classroom. But for those who it will benefit, and it's a large number, it's really important that they go out there and start using it.
Once you decide you're going to get students to use them, you're going to list them, it kind of came to me that for a lot of people, especially if you attended this presentation, you're thinking about it. You're not quite certain. So my thought was, if you're not quite certain, make it available to them. Tell them it's out there. Make it as a suggestion. You can indicate that the lessons might be helpful to them. This is the sort of thing, it's not the sort of thing that if you start as just a suggestion that it's going to hurt you. You can at least try it. And so I think that the best thing to do, since it is available to your students both on the website or on the CD, if your law school is buying those for them, it's very easy. One of the things you can do, for example, you can even make specific suggestions. In a class, you're covering reasonable person of ordinary prudence or similar, you can tell them, by the way, there is a specific lessonette on this, you might want to do it. One thing you might try, and I haven't tried this yet, but if you've got the equipment for it, you might do one of the lessonettes as a class participation. I was thinking that more of a first-year class, especially early in a first semester first-year class, rather than a second or third-year class. But that would be a way to introduce them to it, so they could kind of see it and see what it was. And that would be a way to kind of ease into using it, rather than jumping in with both feet.
Well, I agree with it, and obviously I make them do it from the very first day because of the way I have it in the syllabus. But one thing that tends to reinforce it is to bring the lessonette into the classroom. And I found it very interesting that I did that in a couple of ways. Not only did I do it with the CALI lessonette for, let's say, the rule against perpetuities, but then I took some of those graphics and all and converted them into PowerPoint presentations and made them available on my webpage to the students. And the students found it more useful now that they did the lessonette and we went over the same topics in class. Then they took the PowerPoint presentations and they started to build their own. They were putting their own hypotheticals together and their own chain of events together and stringing together the present and the future interests that went with that. And it seems to be more of the way they are today as opposed to simply sitting and reading through horn books and the like. And so, again, it's a way of presenting it in a variety of ways that they find it more as a useful tool rather than getting the negative idea that this is something that you use to cram with later on just to get ready for final exams.
And then I thought, well, okay, if you're convinced, you can require them. You're certain now you can require them One thing, if you have to use the CALI lessons, at the end of each lesson, the students can print out a little thing that shows how well, it tells them how well they did, how many they got right, how many they got wrong. You print that out. You could have them turn that in if you wanted to. One point I wanted to make is don't grade their performance. Please don't do that. I really think students get more out of this if they can experiment and get some wrong answers and go through the helping questions. And I'm concerned that if you indicate to them that somehow or another, you know, if they get 90% on the CALI lesson, that counts as a 90 or something, it'll give them the wrong impression about the lesson. The lesson ought to be a time for them to experiment, to try an answer that looks close but not quite right, and then leads them through the helping question. You know, they ought to get some wrong answers so they can get the full flavor of it. So I think, you know, if you want to require these, I think you'd be much better off somehow or another marking them on completion of lessons rather than actually performance of lessons.
I agree. We had one of the presentations during this conference dealing with concepts of pre-testing and the like, which certainly is a good analytical tool for us and also for the students. And I get the inference also that what might be the case for upper division classes is that sometimes these lessonettes might actually work as an analytical tool. I have a workshop that I do for third-year students primarily, which is a real estate closing workshop. In there they will negotiate and put together residential real estate closing and commercial real estate closing, commercial leasing operations, and also some foreclosure and bankruptcy materials. Although we tend not to do that negative side too much with real estate. We want them always to be positive, but always we know that somewhere along the line those issues might come up. And so now that we're finishing up with the materials for the property section of the fellowship and fleshing out the library that's there, I can perceive this as a good analytical tool for me to make sure that these students have reached a certain baseline of information by their third year, that they can come into my workshop and work on those skills as opposed to acquiring information. And if they don't have that information, then they see the areas of weakness and we can refer them into some other sections of materials that they need to be working with. And it will also point out to them that they don't know quite as much as they think they know, and now they're getting ready for the bar exam. And hopefully we'll get their attention for that. But I can see that fitting in with this modeling of pre-testing also, but not in a negative way, as you suggest, without a grading factor being there, just pointing out, going, by the way, you don't quite understand the statute of frauds at this stage. Here are some things that you're missing. Here are materials that you can go through to beef up your knowledge and your analytical skills.
In terms of using lessonettes in class, this semester, since we were still in the midst of our fellowship, I started posting the ones that were done for my students to use. And maybe it's particularly because some of them were the ones I wrote. They are particularly eager to do anything you've written or revised. Particularly eager. But they're even very willing and eager to do the ones of my colleagues because they figured if I was sitting there recommending them, they must be important. And that's one of those things that particularly as they approach exams, and we don't want it to be only an exam study tool, but we want them to get captured by CALI at some point, however possible. I found that they're really willing to gobble it up, and I use Blackboard, and what I did is, because these were not published yet, I just couldn't link to them. But there is an ability, and I have the website, and we can provide it to you, to take whatever lesson there is and package it up and post it on your Blackboard web, so you click and go, and I can show you all of that after we're done with this presentation too.
Well, one of the things we kind of said a couple of times in using them, and this was a point that I wanted to make, students will have a real tendency, the first time or two they use CALI, to jump on it right at exam time. They'll see it as a way to test their knowledge right at the end. And I remember Deb Quintel telling us at one point that they can monitor the number of hits on their servers for the website, and it really peaks about Thanksgiving at the end of the year. So what students are basically, now they have no way, of course, of monitoring the CD use, but what we see is we know that students, they've heard you talk about CALI the whole semester, they know they probably should have done these, it's getting right down to the time to take the exam, they want to use it to cram. Well, when we talked about writing the CALI lessons, that wasn't what we were talking about. We were talking about them learning analytical skills and seeing the richness of the material and learning additional hypotheticals. That's not what they really need at exam taking time. That's a little problem you're going to run into. That's when they're going to want to do it. So you want to encourage them to start much earlier. And this is something I have experienced. Even at the end of this past semester, I had a student who did one of mine right at the last minute and was convinced that that was the answer to a question they saw on the exam. Unfortunately, the question dealt with something totally different. So, almost. That's something you have to watch. Encourage them to start much earlier, because these are not little practice exams. That's not what they're designed to do.
But this is an interesting point, that maybe we should be thinking of writing CALI lessonettes that are the reviews of our courses, because they need, before the exam, I think that what they need is a sense of, have I understood this course or am I off base?
Well, some of the lessons are more review-oriented than others. It just depends on the lesson. And that's one of the things that you need to look at and see, because as I said, we've all written lessons, and each time we pick one of those topics, we stop and say, well, is this an overview lesson? Is this a review lesson? Is this extra information? Is this foundational? And here I think I disagree a little bit. Even though the lessons are not intended to be for review, I think that a good number of them still work for some measure of review. If a student can go through them and get it all, they are reviewing, and they are, in fact, preparing for an exam on material that you think is important. So I don't feel as strongly as my co-panelists on this issue. I want them to use it at any time they're going to use it. I think if they find it helpful, they'll start using it earlier themselves. Much though I've tried, I cannot make them do it. Just like we cannot make them read, just like we did not necessarily do all of our reading when we were in law school. However, so that being said, all we can do is hopefully reinforce that if something worked well, they'll use it again earlier next time.
I think the issue that you raise is very well taken. And I don't mean to come across as saying that never would these be review lessonettes. Review is a legitimate teaching model. And if that's the way you would like to construct a CALI lessonette, you have the freedom of doing that, especially if someone else has gone ahead and done some of the more teaching-oriented models. Now you know where the student should be by the time they finish that, and especially by the time they get to the end of what you're adding in class. And then you can construct your own lessonettes to be the end of the semester review sessions with the explanations and with the testing questions and the response questions and the branching and everything else that you want to go through, in hopes that they'll develop the thinking process, not just getting to the answer process.
In a bunch of mine, I know that at the end, in the conclusion, I have at depth recommendation an essay, a hypo with an essay, to give them sort of a sample exam type question. So there is a lot of review built into some of these, not the whole lesson, but I know that at least two of mine have this little hypo at the end saying, okay, answer this essay, having read it all, see what you can do.
Has anyone thought of using the CALI lesson as some sort of early on threshold? You know, if you score less than 60% on this lesson, come and see me, or...
Well, the problem with that is what Ron says, is that there are some students who know what the right answer is, but they're curious, and they click on the wrong answer to see why the wrong answer was wrong. And I don't think you want to discourage that, because that's the way some people learn. When we tell students to study for the bar at my school, one of the things we tell them on a multiple choice question is to go back and not only look at the wrong answer and why you got it wrong, but look at the right answers and why you got it right. Because part of it is maybe you got lucky, maybe you sort of knew the right answer, but you got the right answer for the wrong reason. And so allowing the student who's curious enough to go back and start going through the wrong answers is something I personally would not want to discourage. Though if you wanted to tell them to take it as more of a test, that when you're taking it this time, do it as a quote-unquote test, then it would certainly be legitimate. I would just be very careful to make my purpose clear to them so that they did not feel that when they're doing other lessons they couldn't do that exploration.
Yeah, and I think one thing, I think I know what he's going to say.
There's nothing to prevent you from writing your own diagnostic lessonette. You can even reach out into existing CALI lessonettes and pull individual pages, import pages into it to, construct your own styles of questions. And then after assigning the regular lessonettes to your students, have them do the diagnostic.
And I thought, just to kind of follow up, one of the things about using existing lessonettes is for any particular purpose, you need to read through the lessonette. I mean, these were written by a lot of different people, and some people may have written them with sort of, this is a reviewed lesson in mind, and that would be one that could be used during exam time. Other people wrote it in terms of, might have written a lesson in terms of, I want students to learn to think about the topic, and the lesson may leave them with a lot of open-ended questions. I thought, I know that...
I would have.
I know he's done that. That's Larry Wilkins, and I know he's done it. So part of, that goes all the way back to one of the first things we said. When you're writing a lesson, you have to decide what you're trying to accomplish. What is your your educational objective with it? And the same thing when you're using it, you need to read through somebody else's work and say, well, I wonder what they were doing with this, and does this accomplish? Well, what Larry said is a good idea. You can take lessons that are out there and use them for teaching. If you want to use them for diagnostic work, you can borrow from several and put together your own. You can borrow some and put together your own for teaching. And then those that really fill in gaps that are there, Deb Quintel might want to make it generally available to the...
Also, you should know that Deb Quintel does a lot of work to put together a teaching manual on all of these as we finish our fellowships. And so that there is some guidance out there, an overview for your will be as they finish up. So it's not just go blindly stumbling through, and you'll have more than just the catalog description, at least in the areas in which there's a fellowship. I noticed, I know a bunch of my fellows are here, and I gather some of yours are. For people who haven't done them yet, versus people who have it, my experience was that it was also a wonderful benefit to me. I've taught my BizOrg class, probably a dozen times already. And after working through some of these lessons, when you're writing a lesson, you can't just skip over steps. You have to really word them through and work them out. And so it really made me stop and rethink. And in a lot of cases, I think it made me go back and remember to start at a more basic level. That having taught this 12 times, I just started to assume certain things, which aren't necessarily appropriate, and they're missing out on steps. And having gone through and done the lessons and written them made me stop and say, oh, this is a better way to package it. And so I think it's really helped me personally above what it's done for my students. It's really been rewarding for me in making my teaching fresher again.
What we try to do is you can take the ideas you've had in class, as I said when we started, the things that work. You've got that hypothetical that you use every year that you just know works. So you've got that series of questions. And you can turn that into something that the rest of us can use. And you can even use those student mistakes that you've learned to expect, that question you're going to get every day, and you can make that part of lessonettes. And you can do different things with them. You can make them sort of testing to see where students are. You can make them lessons that they learn it for the first time. You can even make them into kind of review lessons, borrowing and that sort of thing. It's and what's interesting about it is I've taught torts now for 25 years, but working on as a torts fellow, to be able to go back and look at things that way, the thought I had when I teach torts, I know I cover it in a certain way, and when I start noticing students get that sort of deer in the headlights look, that's when I know, well, when you're writing a CALI lesson, you never have that experience. It's just you and the computer, so you have to think about it. You can't wait till you have those students with their mouths open staring at you and going, uh-oh. You have to work through the lesson. So it's very helpful activity, I think, for the faculty member who's writing it. And then students do, I think, enjoy using it. It's a form of education that they're very comfortable with because they're so comfortable with computers anymore. And I think it's very helpful. It either fills in some detail you don't get to cover, or it really reinforces some things.
Well, also one of the things that we have to remember is if we simply say generally it's out there, for instance, there are people who will say there are horn books in the library. You have to understand the signal that sends. That indicates a lower level of importance. No matter what you say about it, if you're not making assignments from it and you're simply referring to it, then the student expectation is generally, I really don't have to go there. If I had to go there, then it would have been assigned, or I would have to have the book. Well, one of the reasons we may not have them have a horn book is because of the cost involved in that. Now with CALI, there is no cost involved for the student. And if you want to assign a lessonette and you put it on your syllabus, you make them link into it, you make it as part of the reading for the day, what you're doing then is you're sending the strongest signal that you can possibly send from an instructional standpoint, and that is you need, as a student, to learn this information, to develop this analytical approach, and here's something that's going to help you do that. And as Ron said, I think they take a different attitude under those circumstances. And by the way, remember what we're doing throughout all of this. We're shifting the work to them. That's where it ought to be. That's the nice part about CALI Author. The work is where it should be. I find it very interesting to speak to some people who Ron and I were discussing outcomes. What do we want the end product to be? And often a law professor will say, I want them to learn to think critically. I want them to reason analytically and then go in and do a straight classroom lecture. It's antithetical to that. I mean, it dispenses information well, but it's not critical thinking. Here we can make them think critically. And they get more and more of an opportunity to do that. And we send them the right signal that way. And it's their job, not ours.
I concur. I think what it does is it gives us a chance. I mean, we all have our substantive course, and whether it's disorder reports or property, we're all doing very similar things. We're trying to train these students to become capable, good attorneys, and we want them to have a set of skills. And we use our particular substantive course to hopefully let them learn a little bit about our substantive course and a little bit about the skills they need to go out and be a lawyer. Critical thinking, reasoning, drafting statutes, reading statutes, all of these things. And CALI is another opportunity, and as I said, particularly after hearing some of the presentations here and remembering and having labels put on the different kinds of learning, it's a reminder that we don't all learn the same, and this really addresses a whole group of people who learn differently.
With that, Joe
Just
had a little demonstration of how he's...
to show you relatively how, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to show you how relatively easy it is to do with it from a syllabus standpoint, we're on the first page of my property syllabus, and all the students would have to do is come in and link on that. Now, you can set this up in essentially two different ways as to how the link would operate. One is they would come into this particular page where they would actually have to sign on. The way I have it structured from my syllabus, if we were going through the NOVA system to get into CALI, is they would bypass all this and go right into the lessonette itself. The only ones that you can't do that with, and in property there are only 3, are the ones that are purely based in the Windows format. But anything else that can be done over the internet, it goes right into the web setup, and they're right into the lessonette. But it's relatively simple for them at this point to do that, because all they need to be doing then is coming over here and then coming down to their school. Make sure that I can spell correctly. Oops, where am I? They're right down here. And then they simply need to know their magic password. Excuse me for just a second. What do we do?
I got you too far.
You got me too far down?
Just go back up.
Okay. Well, I'll have to go further, right? Over here. Oh, and I have to go down then to the I accept portion. I have to go back for a second. I have to come down and accept.
So you have to type that down.
Learn the law. It's a magic one. Everybody has it. And then, and as I say, the way I've got it structured for operating out of our system at Nova Southeastern is this is the page they'll come to. And then they go right through dealing with their lessons.
And on the other hand, as I said, mine were not yet available on the web because they had not yet been published, and so instead I just packaged them up and made them available. I'm just getting out to my web page. My students would just be on there. Very case sensitive. And for mine, they would go and on their first documents page, there at the bottom are just the CALI programs, and right now I think I have 2 posted. One of these I think is Eric's, and right into, or that's Linda's, and right into the program they would go.
So it's relatively simple, or we can make it simple for them to use, if you would like to do that. It eliminates a lot of the complication from the student's perspective.
Does anyone have?
I don't have a question, I do have a comment, and I think probably everybody is aware of this, but we have brought Deb to our campus on 2 different occasions. One for the faculty, both as a group and one-on-one, both in CALI authoring, but also in how do you sell and how do you put these lessons into your class. And then she's always been gracious enough to kind of work with students one-on-one as well. And just for a little food in a hotel, she'll do that. So it's really been fabulous, and we certainly have faculty that have never used. They remember the old CALI. They couldn't get past that it was different, and it's made a really big difference.
And let me just kind of repeat that, because I don't know how much you picked up for the pay-per-view audience. She was just saying that for those who would like to have sort of a local presentation, Ms. Deb Quintel does travel and will come, and we'll put together a program to talk to faculty members about how to use them, to talk to students. I know she's going to the Southeast AALS conference to make a presentation to that group, so she travels quite a bit. She's a very good resource. And she's just if you've got really a lot of any questions about CALI, either authoring or using the lessons, you can find them through her website, her email address. I'm sure she's glad I just said that. And she will at least find the person that you need to talk to.
The CALI staff is incredibly responsive and helpful in your authoring endeavors. They are just wonderful. I can't say enough for when you want to stretch the limits of the program and do something that maybe someone hasn't done before. If you can't figure out how to do it, I personally always struggle for an hour or two before I pick up the phone, but most people just pick up the phone and have their answer in a few minutes, and it's really just been a wonderful experience working that way, knowing that I pick up the phone and I get the answer. So it's great.
Any other questions?
Comments?
Yes.
I have a question on a remark Professor Groman made earlier during the presentation. You mentioned, whilst talking about the students using the CALI CALI library on the web or on the CD, you said, quote, presuming they do it. Do you actually have any idea of how many students do use your lessonettes? Any of you?
We can set it up so it will be done that way, and that's what I intend to do. Not so much as to hold a sword over their head, but I'm very curious about making sure that they are getting into the materials and making use of them. And that's what I want to move up to, is an opportunity to have in-house account as to which of my students are doing it and when.
There are a couple ways to do it also. CALI can tell you how many times your program has been hit from the website. Blackboard, for example, allows me to track which of my students have actually called up the program. Not used it, I can't tell if they've actually used it, but I can tell if they've accessed the program. I get a list, and how many times, if I choose to track. So there are definitely tracking mechanisms out there, yes.
Another way is to require that they work it and then write a critique of the lessonette.
Good.
And you get some ideas about how to revise it.
Or print out the last page.
Or do the certificate.
Yeah, do the certificate.
And Twin has that counting feature that Blackboard has as well. Yeah. If you use Twin instead of Blackboard.
So there are ways to monitor.
You know, some people use a question on the final exam that will only had you done the lesson, maybe would you have had expertise in the writing.
Any other questions? We're right at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.